Welcome to the special feature brought to you on CNBC Africa, focusing on agriculture today. An interesting conversation, a panel discussion lined up to discuss Africa's agricultural progress, especially around innovation and technology. Now, I've heard these statistics thrown around a lot. I'm sure you have as well, that agriculture employs about 45 to 70%, 65 to 70% of Africa's population, and it contributes from anything from 30 to 40% of the GDP. And 70% of people across the continent who are poor are finding their livelihoods in agriculture. That's a huge amount, especially when we know that 45% of the world's unused arable land, it's right here across the continent. But yet the amount of resources applied and the productivity applied to this land has not shifted in over 40 years. So again, we stand at the precipice of an amazing opportunity to feed not only South Africa's and Africa's poor, but to also feed the world. So I'd love to introduce you to our panelists who are going to talk about, a number of things, partnerships, collaborations that are required, but also the technology and the innovation that can create for the continent agriculture that is sustainable and is able to feed the nation. So let me take you through our panel. We've got Abraham Vermeulen. He's the commercial director from Green Terrace, innovation in seeds as well as crop protection. Abraham speaks from Corteva EMEA's side as well, and really starts to unpack technology and what it means for the continent. We then have also Lebohang joining us. Lebohang Lulu. Lebohang is the CEO of Nkanyezi Group, looking at on-the-ground realities of the work that is being done, not only by women, but all those involved in agriculture. Then we have Wandile Sihlobo, Chief Economist at AgBiz, and Wandile is going to give us a little bit of what the indexes are telling us, as well as policy reform that's required. And then finally, right at the end, I've got Ferdi Meyer, Managing Director of BFAP, data-driven insights around Africa's agri-potential. So we have a lot to unpack, and our viewers are keen to, I think, first of all, understand the lay of the land. You know, we've got the numbers. We have to understand why in over 40 years we haven't moved, but what is the opportunity and what is the potential that lies in agriculture, so untapped? Maybe go for us first.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but a beautiful opportunity also. Africa holds today 1/5 of the world population, but we only produce 10% of the world agricultural production, and that disconnect means that we're still dependent on the world to feed us. And as you've shared, we've got all the core components: sunshine, water, land, to be able to feed ourselves and also to grow our export market. Many challenges, climate change, access to technology, credit, etc., to be addressed, but super excited and super committed, not for the challenge, but the opportunity that sits in Africa.
And everyone, when we come back, you're coming from the Corteva agri-science space. I think we're going to really delve into some of the technology that's going to make that possible. It's quite interesting and exciting. I think it's going to govern a lot of what we talk about. But Lebohang, you are one of the few, and I'm sure you believe too few. There needs to be way more organizations like yourself. But you founded this institution, and what's your view? What enticed you to get involved in agriculture?
I am an engineer by profession, a retired one. And then when I looked at how agriculture looked like, it felt like it was for all people. And then I then challenged myself and said, no man, there's actually money there and we need more young people. And then I left my job and went into agriculture full time. And I further studied my studies into sustainable agriculture. I did my master's, and that's when I saw that actually we need more young people, we need more women in this industry. That's why I feel like I needed to make a change.
And I think we're going to pull up, because how do we duplicate that at speed? And what does the data tell us? What does the data tell us about how we see farmers, those who are subsistence farmers and those who are farming to live? How do we start to grow that on scale? And Wandile, you are looking at the data. What does it tell us?
I think from where I sit, really building on the point that Abraham is starting with, which is that we are a continent with the potential And I think that's what Labo is tapping in. But I think if you take a step back, regardless of where the numbers look like, it's still very much clear that the African continent imports a lot of food. Sub-Saharan Africa region, over 45 billion US dollars each year of various agricultural commodities imported. And of course, the entire continent around 80 billion US dollars. But then if the potential, which Abraham is referring to, is there, the key thing then is about how do we unlock that? And certainly all of the ingredients are there. What is missing now is, of course, on the policy side, as well as the application of all of that technology that the private sector could bring, and the governments doing something with the network industries to unlock that.
Sure.
And I think we can revolutionize the African agricultural aspects.
But maybe we can add to that, Ferdi, because policy is one aspect. The other one is the fact that we've got the people who need to do this work. What other pillars do we need to be looking at to unlock the sector?
I think we obviously need to make maybe a distinction in Africa. We talk about Africa, but Africa has many countries, and they're very different in the nature of whether you look at the population, their consumption patterns, their regulations, and we can unpack some of those in a moment. But I think broadly speaking, if we think of some of the pillars that we come across if we're working those supply chains in Africa, first of all, extreme policy uncertainty. Let's give a practical example. Export bans, import bans. That creates extreme uncertainty for all players in the market. So I think, and what's interesting, if you look underneath the hood, there are several countries and in several commodities where we've seen great progress made. And we see this transformation, and production is growing. We see even some yields increasing, some adoption of technology. And the moment that we see some surpluses occurring, the supply chain is not there. The investment by private sector is often halted, or there's uncertainty in the market. So I think policy uncertainty is a key pillar that we need to address. Data. There's a huge shortfall, uncertainty around data. We don't even often get our crop estimates right. And that causes then tremendous volatility in prices, and your investment patterns are just very risky and uncertain in those spaces. So I think policy uncertainty is a big topic to address, and together with that then regulation around technology, the opportunity for investment. And maybe a last point to make, and I'll just use one example as Malawi. You know that Malawi has the cheapest maize in the world in years of surplus. They could go as low as $90 at harvest time, with very small surpluses produced at harvest time. And they would run within 4 or 5 months to the most expensive maize in the world. That just gives you a context around this extreme uncertainty, volatility, storage, supply chains not working effectively in the continent.
And I'm glad that we're having a conversation about the agricultural science, because as you mentioned, the continent is wide. There are many countries with many different needs. How do you manage it from an innovation perspective and working with the crops that farmers are relying on, or the seeds that farmers are relying on to create this crop? I mean, this is complexity. How's Corteva doing that?
No, it is complex, but I think technology also, again, for us holds big value. I think for us also privileged to have a footprint in terms of local presence, local understanding. The R&D organization, as an example, in case we do trials on 100 locations, collect 5 million data points, and then analyze as to what's the best technology to take to a farmer. Now, that could be a commercial farmer in South Africa, it could be a farmer in the Kenya highlands, so each is quite unique. But I think to Ferdi's point, data allows us to be much quicker at bringing the right solutions. But what we now need also is a quick, receptive regulatory environment to keep pace with the pace at which technology can bring the solutions. And it is different solutions needed, from white to yellow maize, from conventional to GMOs, etc. So data allows us to move quicker. but we need also the regulatory framework to be receptive of that technology that's coming through at pace.
Sure. And we know historically it's slow to get regulation and to get government to really be to get ahead of. How does that impact businesses? Like, what does that mean for the person waiting for transformative solutions as a farmer level?
I think there's a bit of uncertainty, and you're not even confident to plant more because things are not moving at the pace that it should be. For an example, I'm going to make an example. We had because I'm both a crop farmer and a poultry farmer, so we had a deal to supply to China, right? So when we came back to South Africa and we wanted that to be fast-tracked, it took forever in such a way that we even lost the client. So fast-tracking regulations and policies is needed in our government, and I hope they listen because it affects, small-scale farmers or commercial or small to commercial farmers, because we really need them to understand what we're doing on the ground and what we need, and we should have actually people understand what is happening on the ground.
Sure. And what's urgent? I don't know, Wandile, you could lean into that question. Lebo was saying it impacts business fundamentally, and it's so vast. But do we know where to start? Where to start and what's most urgent?
I think, look, a conversation started by the private sector firstly and interacting with the government about what technologies they could bring, that would help. If you think about the grain production today, Ferdy mentions a couple of countries where we've seen the yields improving. But that is only in recent years. But if you were to say go back 5 years ago and you take the staple grain in the African continent, maize, for example, you will realize that for much of the expansion in production that we had seen all the way going back was really about the expansion in area planting rather than the improvement in terms of the yields perspective. South Africa, which was among some of the countries that was fast in adopting the technologies, saw yields on maize averaging at 6 tons per hectare, while in much of the African continent we were at 0.5 tons per hectare. The key thing then is about if we can see that when we've moved faster with the technology, there are yield gains, there are yield benefits. The key thing then is about the private sector having those conversations with the government about the technology they bring, but not only about the technology they bring, but about the possibility on food security, improvement in productivity, improvement in jobs that can actually be there. And I think that alignment in vision and understanding what all this brings to society is something that perhaps maybe would accelerate the process and how we interact with all of these interventions and technology, and well as on the regulatory aspects.
If I could build, Sandile, also, it's not just the Africa problem. We've seen also history showed to us that if we go back to the 90s, the US embraced GMO technology, started at 6.5 tons. 30 years later, they had 11 tons. Europe, good soils, good water, access to credit, they opted not to go for GMOs. They had 8 tons. So embracing technology has shifted also a first world country to double, to other ones saying we don't see the value in the technology, and they were restricted. So sometimes it's also about that regulatory framework that could penalize you whether you're an emerging economy or developed one.
Yeah. And it's a bit of a competition, I sometimes feel, now that the continent is so inward looking and we're recognizing the need to be self-sustaining. Ferdy, if you could move your farm to anywhere, which of the countries do you see really putting a spotlight on making movements that you think are positive for you?
If I can take all my South African people along, if that's the deal, on the African continent, goodness, I think Tanzania is a wonderful country, has huge opportunity. It's close to, has a good, close to has a port, a lot of population growth rates fast. So that would be a fascinating country. But obviously the same challenges. And I think I wanted to just bring in that angle of we focus a lot on productivity, which is correct. And if we just quickly compare South Africa's path to some of the other African countries, we have excelled in so let's take average growth rate in maize and soybeans over the last 10 years. South Africa's average annual growth rate in these yields has exceeded the US and Brazil. in growth rates and average annual growth rates. So we are not there on an average absolute level of those yields, but we are catching up. So that's how quick the technology uptake was in South Africa when it occurred. The reality is we are export driven. We have an export terminal. We need to export. So we are basically competing at export parity. So we need efficient infrastructure. We need to get it out of the market. We need to get it into the deep sea because our local market cannot absorb all of it. If we don't do that, it won't be affordable. There won't be incentive for the farmers to get into that technology, into that productivity gains. And that's what we have a lot of times in the challenges in countries like Malawi, like Zambia. They are producing surpluses. But the moment that they move outside, they can service their neighbors, but the transportation is so expensive. If Zambia, for example, wants to export maize out of Dar es Salaam or out of Beira, out of Durban, you can knock off $200 a ton. And by that time, the farmer, she cannot afford that smart technology of seed. So we need to be very careful in our assessment. What is the incentive for farmers to invest in technology in these markets?
And I mean, I think the infrastructure and the logistics element is one of the most challenging ones that every single sector is affected by. But there's a focus continent-wide, again, to improve on just pathways to exporting, right? But this is now a long game. At the same time, technology is offering a lot of opportunities. Abraham, what is it offering in terms of gene editing, in terms of breeding and beyond? What is the offering for the farmer?
Yeah, so I think, and it's important that, of course, technology needs to address productivity, but I think technology needs to go broader than that. It's about biotic stresses, diseases, bacteria, but it's also about abiotic stresses such as drought-tolerant salinic soils in Africa. And I think technology also needs to address those components as well. Now, the beauty is we've had traditional breeding for many years. It has transformed the world. We've had GMOs, and very grateful for our government that was quite at the forefront, progressive, embracing this technology. And we've seen the difference South African farmers had in terms of access to technology to our neighbors up north. But the really transformational part that's happening now is gene editing. And in very basic terms, that's just accelerated breeding. It's different to GMOs, where we would sometimes integrate into a plant foreign proteins to make it insect resistant. But this is playing within the DNA system of the species and the ability to add, delete, increase certain native traits within the plant, and then being able to offer farmers a crop that could address, for example, striga parasites on sorghum. It could offer, working with the universities in Ethiopia, where they've got teff, which is like a wheat-type crop. The stems is too long, a lot of lodging, so how can we tweak the plant to have shorter plants, less lodging? So I think the technology of gene editing is truly amazing as to what we can offer Africa. What I really like about gene editing, and we spoke about affordability and access to Africa, I think the technology is open to many public institutions, academia. We're working with quite a number of them, making it accessible for many of the Africa-specific problems. But also, I believe it's going to bring technology to the minor crops, the crops that don't always meet the global criteria for big investments. And in Africa, we've got some amazing crops, from tea, flowers being exported, cocoa, coffee. So all of these crops is also going to benefit from this technology, and small and big commercial farmers. So super excited as to what this transformational technology would bring.
Yeah, and I had a discussion recently about also the need to be very decisive about where we play. You know, because you're saying that there are specific crops that are leading in the sector. There are certain crops that we could work on bringing into the market. And Lebo, is it easy to know where to play, what to farm, that enables you to build a sustainable enterprise, and for other farmers to find some guidance of where should we be playing as a farmer?
I think it's easy, especially looking at the market normally we've got this app that we look at to check the past experience, that which one did better in the industry. For example, if potatoes did better, it's easy for us to say, okay, let's plant potatoes. And also the help of one dealer. We know when he does his podcast and he'll tell us that it's a good rain for us. I mean, he probably is looking at some app to tell us we're going to have a good rain, let's start planting. So that also assists us to know that, okay, vegetables are good. This type of commodity is going to sell this season. If it's tomatoes, he'll tell us. If it's if it's maize, he'll tell us. So it's easy because we've got people like him, and we've got access to that. Access to market to check that which one did better, and if it's going to be a good season for us.
And as much as you are playing in the space, money is an issue. Yeah. Investment is an issue into your business, because as much as you are given the opportunity, farmers play a long game. It's a very long game. Yeah. There are lots of risks along the way. Wandile, what are the partnerships, the collaborations? What are the things that need to happen for this sector to be more investable and more people like Lebogang invested in to come into the sector and to survive?
I mean, I think, firstly, thinking about the potential wide, not only now in South Africa, but in the African continent, I think the potential is there. But I think getting the basics right, and this combines both the points that Ferdy was alluding to, Lebo is alluding to, and Abraham to alluding to, is going to be important. One, I think on the policy side, Freddie talked about the policy uncertainty. But on the policy uncertainty side, I mean, the basic point is that the African government, I do think that they have to embrace the technologies that are there. South Africa was one of the first in doing that. But I think as the problems evolve with climate change and the other things, new innovations that are coming into the market, we need to be open and saying, okay, we are embracing those and, of course, then adopt them. And I think that's the one aspect. The trade policy friction that usually happens, which also weighs on the profitability of the farmers and then negatively influence their long-term performance, is something that needs to be addressed. There is a boring and a long-term and a difficult one that also is key, which is the infrastructure aspect. Because if we want these value chains to remain as profitable, you talked, Freddie, about the issue of the maize issues in Malawi and the other countries. That has a lot to do then with the fragmented value chains. And those require that the public infrastructure that the governments need to do, all of those needs to be put in place. So it's a combination of things, but I think we can start slow by saying, okay, in embracing science, we are not really spending, but we are changing the regulation. You tick that box, and then you begin to see the private sector. And then you say, in issue of trade, if I decide that I'm not going to block imports or exports, that doesn't cost me anything. You tick that box, then you begin then thinking about where do you draw the tax so that you can address all of the long-term infrastructural aspects. And I think a combination of that would open the room for many other people to participate in the sector. And I think, Zanele, that will take us back to your opening point where you were saying this is a sector that employs many people and it can still contribute to growth, because then you can unleash it and unlock it and we can be able to achieve exactly that.
And there's a time when I believe, we shouldn't say back in the day, but there was a time when we did really well in so many sectors when it came to farming. And over the years, it's become more complex. There's been a lot of things that have disturbed the farming sector, be it political, be it environmental. So, Ferdi, let's cast our way forward without looking back too much and say, what do you think is required for us to be globally competitive? What are the things we need to do that can really unlock our ability to play better?
Can I maybe answer that question just to say where we are in terms of our ag sector? As we're sitting here today, we are planting, and this is now expansion. One dealer talked about the area expansion in Africa, the growth mainly coming from area, not really from yields. In South Africa, it's both. So it's amazing. We're sitting here, and we are, for the intentions to plant, biggest area planted in the last 30 years. In South Africa. So that just shows you there's a lot of drive, there's a lot of dynamism in the agriculture sector. It's been the shining light through this period where we had slow economic growth. So if we just look at the last 10 years, ag grew by about an average 3.3% in real terms. The economy expanded by 0.8%. So in South Africa, the momentum has been fantastic. The resilience has been fantastic. we still have sectors that we need to address, especially in terms of inclusion, where we have areas where we have huge potential that we're not unlocking, and Wandile talked about that. Going forward, those are the areas that we need to focus on. A lot of idle land that we can still bring into production. We need the infrastructure, and we need to open the markets, because that's the one thing that's very different in South Africa compared to a number of the African countries where we have single commodities. Let's say, for example, dry beans, out of a big area out of Africa where you have exports into India. But mostly, like Wandile was mentioning, most African countries are net importers of food. South Africa is exporting. So we are net exporters of food. So by definition, we need to look at opening up of export markets. That requires regulation. It's the non-tariff barriers. It's the NBTs, the new breeding technologies that Abraham was talking about, the harmonization of these agreements to open up the markets, infrastructure, policy regulation, and then access to land and finance. I think those are the opportunities. So we are seeing this rapid expansion that we've seen over the last 10 years slowing down, and we need to be really resilient now and focusing on the key elements. And that's, I think, what also in terms of the master plan, what the master plan is looking at, the agriculture master plan, is pinpointing what are the cross-cutting factors that we need to address and focus on to unlock the growth, like what you were referring to in terms of those specific markets. So there are very specific markets in South Africa, but we need to realize that we've got this growth potential into export markets. We are effectively outproducing our local market, and we need to be very sharp in our narrative and the way that we shape the future narrative around growth.
If I could just add 2 points also. It's about having a regulatory framework, and again, let me speak from a technology seat. It's about aligning our regulations also to those export markets, because what bad would look like is if you have NBT, gene-edited crop, and we classify it as GMOs. Now then, by regulations, you need to then export it as a GMO. And if you export that into Europe, Europe would say, but we don't accept GMOs. And if it's not a GMO crop, then we've just classified the wrong technology under the wrong umbrella, and that then hinders trade. The other one that's very important also for Africa is about capacity building and partnerships. I think it's important that as technology gets to the market quicker, more sophisticated, it's important also that when we give technology in the hand of somebody, that they have the ability, they've paid for it, to unlock it as well. And there, I think partnerships, working with institutions, making sure that we train, stewardship is as important as designing and having the regulatory partnerships. So I think capacity building is as important.
But my question is, where are you doing the capacity building? Where are you doing what type of collaborations are you doing to unlock that?
And again, it's going to be a team effort. As Corteva, we've got one of the core values of building together. We don't have the reach or the pockets to do it across Africa, but I think from a technology perspective, open joint R&D on gene technology, building capacity. Lebo, I think you've also attended our Soil Sisters Academy with Gibbs University in terms of building agripreneurs. So whether it is about training the farmer on safe use, whether it's about building business capacity, whether it's about working jointly with universities, it's going to take multiple efforts. Fadi, you also mentioned Africa. We often say it's one town or one village, and it's not. I think for Corteva also, we've identified to say which are the big markets, the ones ready for technology, the ones that can shape Africa. So we also very selectively saying these are the 10 markets we can win there, and then next time let's go for the next, because I think a shotgun approach to try and do it in every corner of Africa is also the wrong approach.
And as much as it's one continent, they are so different. Every single continent has got such different nuances. But let's come home quickly. A quick question that came to mind is access. As Abraham was speaking about, how easy is it for young people, for women, to see the sector and to get into the sector and to find a way to operate within it? Do you think there's more work that needs to be done to create visible access?
I just want to commend Corteva what they're doing, because there are sources that program really reaches everyone around the country. And it's not only that, there's also other programs that, collaborate with women, and they are very intentional about supporting women and young women, especially in the sector. So I feel like they're doing well. Yes, rapidly, slowly, but they're doing very well, because now everyone is, all the focus is on women and young people to join in the sector. So I think we need to more of Koteva's programs, and instead of having 30, let's increase the numbers so that more people can come in. Because I think, just to add, I applied 3 times to get in because I wanted to, because I could see that after when women came from that program, their lives changed, and mine, and I'm a living testimony of that after the Koteva program, I managed to get access to funding from other institutions because of what I was taught from the program.
And I think there's a huge, the number of people, the number of women available is massive, and no matter how much your efforts are, you're only reaching so many. So how do we start to scale it? And Wandile, I think from a partnership perspective, where are the pointers that still need to be unlocked? Is it at a school level? Is it university level? Is it where do we need to be unlocking access? Because people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, I think the one point I want to build from Zanele, coming to your point, is this issue of capacity and why other governments tend not to be receptive of technology. Because let's face it, the truth is that some of these technologies have been there and other countries have been resistant to them. And that lies on both hands of the technology developers, you, Abraham, and the other colleagues, as well as those governments, because capacitating, it is an important thing to capacitate the farmers, but it's another thing to capacitate work with the regulators and those governments, because in today's world, where there are geopolitics, and there are conversation on who owns what technology and what are the implications of that for the sustainability of a number of these economies. It's a consideration that is serious that one has to actually put on the table in this discussion. And I think then ensuring that whatever the research institution of those countries and their breeders, to a certain extent, they have that close cooperation with the technology providers. It's something that I think it would ease and ensure that there is receptiveness on bringing that technology, because we all need it, and we all need it for making sure that global food security expands. In as far as Africa and the young people, Lebo and many others coming into the sector, I think the whole notion about agriculture in Africa and whether young people like it or not, we have to sort of like reframe it. Many people always make this conversation and say, let's make agriculture sexy so that young people come in. But I think that's the wrong framing. It's about making it more profitable so that the young people can see it as a business opportunity. But young people will see it as a business opportunity if they know that you start at a reasonably smaller scale, you can apply technology, biological and also mechanical, to increase the efficiencies and grow with scale and be able to produce other things and be linked to greater value chains. And I think once that is there, then it begins to see agriculture as any other developed sector or important sector of the economies. Then that changes. And it involves, though, again, partnerships, interactions for us all to be able to achieve that goal that we all want, and that inclusive participation that we want for the sector.
Sure. It's a huge task that we are giving to people operating already at quite a sophisticated level. And Lebo, you're an interesting example. Previous engineer, went on to study agriculture. But any industry needs to have layers of development. So when we look at the farmer, you have a whole lot of people that work in your environment, and there's a whole value chain that they are aware of, that they could easily plug into. What are the grassroots opportunities to just simple things that can grow the number of people participating, whether for a farm or even independently in the future? Do we have that mindset of developing at every level as a country, as a continent?
I can maybe take a shot at it. I think often we underestimate how smart people are that are working on the ground, and why do they do what they do. So I think we need to spend more time understanding behavior of subsistence farmers. Why are they doing what they're doing? And we'll be surprised to see how smart and risk hedging they take their decisions. And risk at various levels. It's whether these are family risks or political, like social risks, economic risks, political risks. I think we need to get a good understanding of what's really happening on the ground, and start there, and then link to that, and that's part of our business at BFAP, is building up the data. The context and the data at ground level, which often does not exist here, and start to build the context and the narrative level. I think you are figuring out those supply chains on your own. And I think if we can start to inform the debate and get a real understanding of what shapes decision making, and why are you not buying that seed? Is it only affordability, or was it maybe 2 years ago somebody did buy that seed and the supply chain just dried up, or there was a drought and affordability dried up, or maybe government just came in and handed out seed and government's involved. So one really needs to take a step back and say, what's the context, how are these decisions taken, and the data and the analytics around that. And I think if we can spend more resources in that space, we'll get a better understanding of how to inform the broader debate, and then ultimately the participation. Because like Wandile says, at the end of the day, if it's not making sense to get involved, you won't get involved. If there's not a profit to make, if you cannot sustain a family, you won't do it.
And this is a huge task for organizations like yourself, because you're operating, let's say, in 10 different countries across the continent, where conversations are going to be fundamentally different. So how are you dealing with the localization and the integration of the work that you're doing with the actual people that will ultimately own and run those particular farms, be they small or be they large? Is our relationships key at all levels for you?
No, definitely. And I've taken note, Sandile, your question to say we should have the debates, whether it's with government, with small-scale farmers as well. I think there's many great examples. The one that comes to mind in terms of driving technology is Zambia. So a few years back, Zambia used to have a FISA program where they would actually buy seeds from all the seed players. They would first say the extension officers go collect the demand, how much would you like from company A, B and C. They would purchase the seeds and then distribute the seeds. A few years later they said that we're going to stop buying the seeds, we're going to give our farmers a e-card, a debit card, and now the farmer has the choice to go and either buy fertilizer, seeds or inputs. So it's our role, working with farmers unions, extension officers, to showcase the technology, because government is enabling them but not making the decision for them. So I think there's example, and it's a progressive journey that you need to take on. So in the beginning it might be free seeds given by USAID or Bill Melinda Gates, then you would convince government to procure the inputs, and then government says, okay, now we'll give the financing, and eventually we'll get to a state where you say, well, the farmer should now be self-sufficient. So I think it's about walking with government through this journey. Has been a great example of Zambia also, and this year again Zambia produced a record crop. Yeah, where are they going with it? So
the neighbors, not deep sea.
You want to store it?
Yeah.
With the last year and the previous year's crop. But Lewang, don't sell us out. How much support are you believing you're getting? I mean, great examples made about Zambia. I have not yet heard of us doing that in South Africa. Your experience in terms of just direct support to give you what you need to test out some of the technology that's available in your space?
Support we do get, especially from the extension officers in our province. In terms of technology, I think it's another topic for another day, because I'm saying this simply because I like what Ferdi said, yes, about saying that entrepreneurs or farmers are very smart. So, and I'm also building up on what Wandile is saying, that we should have small-scale farmers in the room, government in the room, and as well as these technologies, so that everybody understands the importance of technologies. Because I could be sitting here, I've done my master's and my research, but you find that somebody in the government or extension office, they don't see the importance of technology. And when you come as a farmer to them and say, can't you maybe order something like this for us to increase the yield or for us to increase our farming, they don't. There's the disconnection. So it would really be important for us to have all the parties in one room where they understand how these things interlink and how they benefit the farmers on the ground. But slowly we are getting there.
And we might be getting there slowly, but we talked earlier on and we started with what a great opportunity we have. I mean, to think of the sector as such a contributor, for me, it boggles the mind how much we contribute to GDP. Is there a target from ministerial or government perspective as to how much more? You know, I spoke to Patricia and she was like, she wants tourism to add an extra 2%. You know, is there a trackable target, Wandile, that we are aiming for and we want to achieve, at least as a country, because we sit here?
I mean, I think you can look at this in two parts. For South Africa, and put the continent aside for a moment, work that Ferdi, BFEP, and us at AgBiz and many others, AgriSA and the others in South Africa, we have done, it has become clear that we could still expand the sector's gross value added by plus 30%. Ferdi and the colleagues said in 2012, under the National Development Plan, agriculture, its value chain and some of the associated industries could create 1 million jobs, and that could be meaningful to South Africa, because today, if you think about the jobs that are in primary agriculture as well as those are in value chain, we are just over 1 million. Then there is still room for expansion in South Africa. But of course, to achieve that, it's one thing to us support Lebo and many other colleagues on that side, but it's another thing to ensure that we have the logistics, the export markets and the others. But on the African continent, though, I mean, you have to consider the fact that you have agriculture in a number of the African economies accounting for double digits of their GDP. So if you are growing the value of that, you can imagine the spin-offs that you can make in those economies. And yes, indeed, at the start, it will, of course, be assisting a lot in the rural economy and those value chains that are associated with that. But it gives them at least a stepping stone for even other advanced industries that can be developed on that. So if we are thinking about the next steps or the much quicker ways of making sure that the rural economies improve, I think that here at home in South Africa, but in much of the African continent, agriculture provides us that. And I think this is why, by the way, and I think it's linked to the conversation of this year, at the G20, the Agricultural Task Force, one of the key things that they are emphasizing is exactly on that, because I think this can do something that is meaningful for the growth of the economies in the continent.
It's been a journey. I mean, we have G20 now having these conversations, escalating across a number of different sectors, and then we look at the one plan. Are we seeing everything come together? Because the critical thing is that if we are thinking and planning and strategizing in isolation, and there isn't a true source of data that pulls it all together, so that investors understand that when they invest in a particular sector, all the other impacting sectors are doing what they need to do. So is transport, is logistics, is policy surrounding the framework of agriculture. So do you have hope that it's G20 has perhaps helped to lift us up so that we can see the full picture and say, okay, we're all on the same page, or do we still need to refine our plans so one plans can actually start to make sense?
Yeah, we've come with so many plans.
Yeah.
And that's a concern, isn't it? It's the plans, and I think there have been, if we think in a South African context, a very consistent message over, let's say, the last 10, 12 years, one leader from the National Development Plan. Same strategy, Pakisa, master plan, just narrowing it down per value chain, articulating it finer. So I think on the progress side, I think we are getting sharper in maybe
more
not
refined.
The broad stroke. I hope we're getting sharper in terms of A, B, and C, and D, and not E, not E, D. But the implementation, I think that's still where the struggle lies. We talk about an Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, and we talk about it so many times, but we don't address the layer below that, which says key bottlenecks at border posts. Let's just go and sort those out. Trucks that are standing there for a week, that just eats into real affordability of food in the continent. If we would just think about inefficiencies, what it costs us, then, these continental free trade agreements are agreed on in a boardroom, but what's happening on the ground and implementation. So I would spend more money and effort in getting people on the ground that actually implement. I think we have good plans. I think there's broad alignment. I think voices out there will always be voices out there which kind of go left or right or middle or up or down. But I think there's agreement, but it's the execution where the challenge lies.
And I agree with you. I must say I feel the sentiment that we've absolutely gone so much sharper and clearer in what is required. And we need 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 great decisions to be made, for example, around border control, and we will see the market opening up. But Cortiva, you were just but one of many organizations continuing to see yourselves really vested in the continent. And are you the commercial director? What are you seeing that's just fueling your continuous investment?
Yeah, so as I've mentioned, the underlying fundamentals is just so great. The people, the culture for agriculture is so receptive. When you travel across Africa, people are so hungry for technology and knowledge, and that's really the exciting part. What excites us also is the part about sustainability, environmental impact. So yes, trade, technology, productivity, but we all also realize that we need to ensure also it's done in a sustainable way. So it's good also to see the debates, and at least in Africa when we talk about climate change, there's good alignment to say, for Africa, that also hurts. So again, for us, that's the exciting part, also sort of starting to focus a distinct technology drive to say, how do we also address some of the climate challenges that would face Africa even more so. And for small-scale farmers, losing a crop, that's losing livelihood for a year, so they don't have a fallback as well. And again, I think technology is going to address that in a big way. So super excited also to having the debate on the environmental sustainable side as well. Yeah.
And I like your note. I think we're going to wrap up on what makes me excited, I think, about the sector, because you're right, the opportunities are so vast, and the fundamentals are there, and the people are absolutely there. But they're going to somehow have to find themselves to be very resilient and to wait for us to just cross over the precipice. So, Lebo, what keeps you going and excited about the sector?
What keeps me going or excited is that there's intentionality in terms of technology and innovation towards agriculture. That gives me rest to know that I can plant 10 hectares of tomatoes and not worrying about how the weather will destroy my crop or the uncertainty. So I think that also gives us some rest to say 5 years from now, definitely we'll be in a better place. Like, yeah, we are getting sharper, but I know 5 years from now, things are getting better and we are adopting to technology and innovation. So that is really exciting, and I don't regret joining the agriculture, because I see now that since I was an engineer, it's also the component of engineering that is coming into the sector, and that is really exciting.
And anybody can study and have different types of qualifications, and they will all lend a hand in the sector. So it's not exclusive to having gone to just agricultural school. So it's quite inspiring to hear. Wandile, your passion is palpable. What drives you to just keep on working in this sector?
I mean, look, if you listen to every speech on an economic side by the leadership of South Africa, or you listen to speeches by the leadership in any African country, or the leadership of China or Asian countries, agriculture is often mentioned as one of those sectors that is out there. So the fact that the sector in recent years has actually grown up in terms of their profile amongst the political leaders, it does mean then that it will remain there for quite some time. But also, in addition to that, all of these exciting innovations that are coming with the technology providers, all of this means that even the investors will likely continue to be looking at the agricultural sector. And I think for me, looking at all of this environment, as well as the outlook that we read about from many people, it is only exciting that agriculture will actually be growing as well as its value chain. And I think that gives everyone a sense of encouragement about where the sector they participate in is, but most importantly, the role this sector can play in the African economies, and indeed, finally, hopefully, contribute on exporting and feeding the world, the message that all of us in Africa, we always say we will do. And I hope that over time we can be able to do that.
You just chuffed that as an economist you chose this sector. I mean, I can just see you bragging. So to every other economist that's listening to you, that you chose the right sector. And from your perspective, Ferdi, again, you're sitting with a whole lot of people really vested their livelihoods for years and not moving. Your thoughts on the hope that drives us forward.
Yeah, I think for us, well, I would say the people in the sector. I can only describe them. I think at a previous panel I mentioned this. Fearless. I think that's the word that I want to use for agriculture people on the ground, being in agriculture, farming, processing, producing food. Is if we just look at the extreme weather, we were talking outside over the last 4 or 5 seasons, we've had drought, we had floods, we had early rain, we had late rain. And through all this period, agriculture has kept on producing, kept on growing, kept on putting food at export parity levels, which is as competitive as you can be on the table of South African people. And that's, for me, it's a fearless belief in your sector, in your people, in your country. And that's what keeps me in the sector, is saying the people they just keep on investing, fearless. Regardless of climate and politics, they just keep on going. And that makes me extremely excited to work in the sector and with these people, and to have a fearless drive and passion to be in the sector and know what you can ask any agriculture person and they'll tell you why they're in that sector. And that's what it is. They know what they're there for, what their purpose is. And that's what keeps me in that sector.
And they move from one season to the next, and to the next, and to the next, because...
Keep on reinvesting.
Yeah, it's going to come. And I want to pick up on the investment piece, because continent-wide, the development banks and international institutions also have a huge eye, not only on research and technology, but also on investment into the sector. How are you seeing capital flowing and supporting the sector, and capital going back to investors? I think that's an important question.
Yeah, I try to convince my kids to go study agricultural medicine, because we need to eat and we need to be healthy. So from an investor perspective, I think the underlying fundamental demand will always be there for food. So that's the one positive for investors. I think for Africa also, again, driving our export growth opportunity would allow us to create more dollars, allow us to afford better technology as well. So I think there should be a big drive also to say, how do we uplift exports for the Africa continent, also to benefit not just from importing as well. But from a Corteva perspective, fully committed, big investments in Africa, increasing capacity, because we truly see a phenomenal growth opportunity that sits on the continent as well. So from that perspective, but you need to have a long view. We get one opportunity once a year to plant a crop. If you're there for a quick week turnaround, this is the wrong industry. It's about a long-term commitment, which we also like to make on the Africa continent. Yeah.
And I think being invested in Africa is one thing, and then being the person or the small farmer owning a farm and running a farm, I mean, that also must take huge personal investment. I've got a few more minutes, and what has it meant for you? What has it felt like for you to this is corporate investment, and you are physical, personal investment. What has it felt like?
Knowing that there are a lot of people that are working at the farm, and that they are, feeding their families and who are making a difference, that for me just tops it. And it's really interesting how South Africa is moving in terms of, supporting the farmers with infrastructure, and how open they are now with, the capital that they're giving us. I, for one, have been funded by 4 institutions already. And, I share with my social media friends to say that, come to agriculture, there's actually funding, there's actually money, let's work, let's sort out the food security. So a lot of people are believing, because now we are the truth, we are the face, they can see that this thing is really happening. So I'm really encouraged about it, and really I hope a lot of people can see from us, and I'm glad that people like other funding institutions, they're opening their doors for small scale farmers to move us to commercial scale.
Thank you so much. Only a quick one from you, and then we might make it to Ferdi. closing remark quickly.
At the Agricultural Business Chamber, we have what we call the Agribusiness Confidence Index. Looking at it over time, it's been consistently showing that although it has its dips, but the sentiment about where the sector is going, especially in South Africa, it's been pretty much robust, and we've seen the flow of investments following that. My sense is that even in much of the African continent, that's the feeling. So there is confidence, and the investment will flow into the sector. And I'm sure that's what you are hoping, you are seeing, Freddie.
I'm seeing it, yeah.
Absolutely.
And we are seeing it. We are seeing so many funders really put a spotlight on it. Where should it go? Is the funding going in the right places? Is it structured appropriately? Quick one from you, Ferdi.
Yeah, just maybe a quick last one on technology. I think that we had a lot of discussion around that today. And for me, there are three elements. It's access. It needs to be, you need to have accessibility at all levels, affordability, and the regulation part. And I think this is now putting my farmer's hat on also. We as farmers need to be disciplined in the way that what we do with the technology. Because if we don't use it right, we could lose it. And then we don't get the full kick, we don't get the full benefit. So I think it's this fine balance in technology where you have the regulation, you have the affordability, you have the access. And I think then it makes sense for all the players in this room to take us forward in the drive, and that's desperately needed for growth. That's I think what we've mentioned a number of times today is around the opportunity for growth, but to unlock it, we need that investment in the technology.
Well, thank you so much. I think there's been a very interesting conversation. I'm hoping that this the technology that's looking at the genetic, just minor shifts that are going to be life-changing for farmers continues to grow in a very big, very complex country with so many needs. And as we see climate change coming, and as we see many other factors come to play over the years, the sector's got to be agile, and technology is at the forefront of that. So I really want to thank my panelists for the conversation today, looking at technology and how technology plays a role in creating resilience in the farming sector. Huge investment, not only from Corteva as a science institution, but also from the very players who are doing the research, who are doing the farming, contributing back to what is needed to make agriculture thrive, not only in South Africa, but across the continent. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. I'm sure many are going to look at how to get involved in agriculture. Good luck to you. I'll be doing it myself in a very small, very tiny, very small way. But I'll see you next time for our next conversation. Take care.